Hello, and thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Michael Jacobs Radio Show on the Building Fortunes Radio and the Humongous Radio Network. Thanks again for listening in. The Michael Jacobs Radio Show is featured on Building Fortunes Radio with co-host Peter Mingils and main distinguished host Michael Jacobs. We are here, broadcasting worldwide, online, to help make the world become a better place. Michael Jacobs is famously known as a personal financial strategist and trusted commercial loan specialist. Contact Michael and let him help you with many of your financial strategies. You'll be able to hear the Michael Jacobs Radio Show on the Humongous AM and Humongous FM radio network and on all major platforms, such as Amazon's Audible and Apple Podcasts, Spotify and iHeartRadio, and many of your other favorite podcasts. Share this show with the people that are important to you and let us help you make a difference in your world. Now, on to the Michael Jacobs Radio Show. Take it away, Peter.
Hello, everyone. Peter Mingils here. You are listening to the Michael Jacobs Show on the Building Fortunes Radio Network. We are pleased to have you here every week with Michael Jacobs. That's why we call it the Michael Jacobs Radio Show. He's got a great domain name, michaeljacobsradioshow.com. Like, what else would we call it? He's also got a regular domain name, michaeljacobs.com, because Michael J. Jacobs is his LinkedIn handle. And you can go find him all over the place. When we do this radio show, we post it on, besides buildingfortunesradio.com and buildingfortunesradio.net, and besides humongousradio.com and the AM and the FM stations, we also rebroadcast this through Amazon's podcast, Apple's podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and lots of others. And just recently, I am pleased to announce I figured out a way to easily post to YouTube and Facebook. And some people that might be listening in might say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, we do an audio, and Facebook and YouTube like video, so we had to figure out how to make all the audios into videos, and we figured out how to do that. So you'll see more of us. Matter of fact, a lot of us right now, as we're rebroadcasting some of the previous radio shows. So this Michael Jacobs Radio Show will now be on YouTube and Facebook, and a little bit later on, I think I'm going to try to figure out how to put it on X and whatever other ones we can possibly put it on, because we want maximum exposure to this information, because I wish I was listening to this decades ago. I used to say 40 years ago. I wish I had access to information like this 40 years ago, but 40 years ago, Michael was a younger man and not as smart as he is today. So we kind of deduced it down to 20 years ago, I would want to listen to Michael Jacobs, and definitely 10 years ago, and certainly today. But if I could go back time, you know, that Cher song, if I could turn back time, I won't sing it for you, but if I could turn back time, I would really listen to this and take action on the things that he's mentioning relative to my situation, because I'd be in a much better spot. So having said that, Michael Jacobs, thanks for being here on your radio show on the michaeljacobsradioshow.com radio show.
Hello, Peter. As always, I appreciate the platform that you give me that allows me to take conversations in whatever direction I want them to go. So, a little bit of background for those who maybe are listening to for the first time. I have spent the last 25 years working with individuals, families, small, medium, large-sized companies, to help educate people as far as how money works, more importantly, how we can make money work better for them, empower them to be able to assist me in the creation of their financial strategies designed so that they can retire on their own terms, help support an aging parent, funding the college experience for their kids, being more tax efficient, no better feeling than giving the government less money than absolutely necessary, making sure that they have proper protection, starting a business, being more philanthropic. Whatever the goal and desire is, we can customize a strategy to meet and deliver that solution. And then working with over 200 financial companies like Nationwide, Gabelli, Morningstar, Oppenheimer, AIG, Transamerica, Fidelity, BlackRock, list goes on and on. So when I'm not doing that, I also own a commercial lending brokerage. So I deal with all types of funding for real estate and PO factoring and inventory factoring and healthcare financing, equipment leasing, lines of credit. I love the manipulation of money. I love to teach. I love to educate. So I'm in the right place. So, as you mentioned, today's topics or today's topic are business owners and the three biggest daily challenges that they face. And these challenges are cash flow management, employee retention, and taxes. Now, I deal with all different types of business owners, both in the financial strategy part of my business and the commercial lending. And it's always interesting to me because these three things individually can keep somebody up at night. But when you're dealing with all three on a daily basis, it is incredible the amount of stress that one can deal with. So I see this all the time. A business can be profitable on paper and still run out of money. A business can have great revenue and still lose its best employees. And a business can make money all year and still be shocked by its tax bill. You know, the more money that we make, if we're not planning it out correctly, the more money we got to pay to the tax man. And to me, I somewhat equate the tax man to Santa Claus. He knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, and he's got the reindeer spying on you. So I want to start out with cash flow because every business has to deal with this. And what I see is that poor cash flow creates stress. Stress affects management and its employees. Employee turnover increases expenses. You know, I have seen many a times employees, they won't necessarily leave their job strictly for money. They leave their job because they feel unappreciated, right? This is getting into the employee retention. So from a cash flow perspective, what can we do to make sure that the employees are excited to show up to work? We also have to deal with higher expenses, reduce the cash flow. Poor tax planning creates unexpected liabilities, and unexpected tax bills create additional cash flow problems. So all three of these things tend to wind up feeding into each other. So that challenge for cash flow is that it's not the same as profit. People think, oh my God, I'm doing all of this business. So let's say I was doing 500,000 annual revenue, 100,000 in profit, but yet I only got $5,000 in the bank. So how is it that with all of that revenue, I only have 1% of it sitting in the bank? So some of the things that can feed into this, and I'm sure all business owners listening can appreciate this, but sometimes customers haven't paid yet. So inventory has already been purchased. If I am going to, let's say I'm a real estate developer and I'm doing a housing project, and I've already built the inventory because maybe I got a good deal on it and I wanted to lock in that lower price, that is cash. That's money that is no longer available for me to be able to use. Now, payroll is going to be due every week. Taxes are due. Debt payments are due. Equipment needs repair. Unexpected expenses arise. This is stuff that goes on all the time. So there's an interesting saying: revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash flow is reality. That to me is so interesting because it's three completely different ways to look at things. So another issue that we all get to deal with is timing problems. Let's say, for the sake of argument, I offer my clients different options on how they want to pay. So I could say you can pay in 30 days, you can pay in 60 days, or you can pay in 90 days. Now, typically what I'm going to do is I'm going to discount I'll offer some type of discount if they pay in 30 days versus 90 days, because it's costing me money if they're waiting the 90 days. So employees must be paid every week or every 2 weeks. Rent is due monthly. Vendors want payment in 30 days. So if I'm offering 90, but my vendors want 30 days payment, I've got to make sure that I'm keeping more cash on hand, which can ultimately limit the opportunities that I might be able to take advantage of. Now, let's say, for the sake of argument, I'm a landscaper. So I'm going to have a seasonal business. I'm going to have strong months, I'm going to have slow months, and I'm going to have highly unpredictable revenue. So one thing that I often tell people where the revenue is not always consistent, if I have bad months and I have good months, and I'm plotting out in the financial strategy side of things, especially on the personal side, I'm going to want to create that strategy more around the slower months than the stronger months. Because if we keep a certain amount of reality based on the slower months, if we have more money, we can always figure out what to do with it. But if we're living our life around the stronger months, and then we have those months where the money's not there, now we're going to run into bigger problems. Now, some might think that a good problem to have is growing too quickly. Growth can actually create cash flow problems. I'm hiring more employees. I may need more inventory, larger facilities, more equipment, more marketing, more accounts receivables. So can the business afford its own growth? So this is where having a strong business plan, everybody thinks, oh, I'll just do a business plan, I'm trying to raise capital, whatever. But the reality is that a business plan is something that needs to be evolving. Because if I'm anticipating growing 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 2 years, 5 years, and I have that growth plan, then my cash flow management needs to be in line with how I think that things are going to happen. Because if things don't happen the way that I think they're going to happen, I may need to adjust my growth plan. So customers who pay slowly, a business can become the bank for its customers. And this is not something that any business really wants to have to do. However, let's say, for the sake of argument, I offer seller financing for real estate, or customer financing, which you're starting to see even in grocery stores. You're seeing grocery stores offering financing for the groceries that people are buying. So you're providing the product or service, pays its employees, pays its vendors, And then you have to wait months to collect. So this can definitely create issues going on in the background. So when I'm doing this for people, I'm mixing business and personal money. Because at the end of the day, even as a business owner, I still have to make sure that I'm paying myself so that I can pay my bills. So, God forbid personal expenses get paid from the business. There is a right way and a wrong way to do this. And if I do it incorrectly, now I'm piercing the corporate veil and I'm opening up myself to, if somebody decides to sue me, I'm opening myself up to liability for the business, that the whole purpose of the business was to protect myself from that liability. So I don't want to be paying myself personally, and I don't want to be paying my business expenses out of my personal account. So no clear owner compensation, no clear profit distribution strategy. This often will leave me with no emergency fund. Those of you who have heard me talk about the personal financial strategy often hear me talk about the need for the emergency fund. A business is no different. If I have no emergency fund and something comes up, where am I going to get this money that I need? Sometimes it can be meeting payroll. Sometimes it can be an opportunity that I really want to be able to take advantage of. There are so many different things that might wind up losing a customer, having to deal with equipment failure. If my equipment is failing and I can't produce my product and I can't meet the needs of my clients, now all of a sudden I'm going to lose business. So now I'm getting hit from all different types of things. And then what happens with an economic slowdown? So many people saw this during COVID because so many businesses were affected. And then employee departure. A great example of this, again, is the real estate developer that's putting up the housing complex or commercial buildings, what have you. During COVID, people were running into supply chain issues. So if I'm accustomed to buying my materials once a month, and I built my cash flow management around that once a month, and then all of a sudden COVID hits and my materials are now only available to me once every 6 months. How do I facilitate this? Because now I need to have 6 months worth of capital available to be able to buy my materials. If I'm not accustomed to this, it's going to take time for me to be able to get accustomed to it. So what causes cash flow management issue? If I have no forecast, meaning I'm not looking ahead to see what I'm going to need, what issues may come up, how much money is in the bank today? Again, if we look back to earlier, if I have a project I'm working on that I've bought materials for, or I'm working on a contract with the government, and what came first, the chicken or the egg? If I win this contract, I may have to be up and running in a very short period of time. Am I hiring for this project, or am I waiting to see whether or not I get the project? So if I'm trying to raise capital, how much do I need to cover my debt service? If I'm dealing with the government, typically they're going to be like 90-day pay. So now I got to wait 90 days to get paid. Meanwhile, my employees have to be paid. So when I'm raising capital, I'm going to want to make sure that I factor that in as a cost of doing business. So what will my cash flow position be 30, 60, 90 days from now? Poor pricing. Our labor costs going up. You know, when I look at minimum wage and I look at, let's say, restaurants, for so long, minimum wage is $5 an hour, $6 an hour. All of a sudden, in many places, it's up to $15 an hour. So my minimum wage labor cost just tripled. So if labor is one of my core costs, is this going to be affecting the cost of my product? In this case, the food, the service, so many different things. My overhead. If I'm leasing my building, unless I'm locking in a longer term lease, what happens when my rent goes up? What happens if utilities go up? What happens if taxes go up? What happens if the cost of capital goes up? You know, if I'm operating in debt, which isn't always bad, because that can buy me leverage and it can buy me time, but if my cost of capital goes up and it starts interfering with my profits, now I have to look at how I'm doing business, and does it make sense to keep going? Do I need to restructure? Do I need to take on a business partner? And then the one thing that is guaranteed is inflation. So am I building in my pricing to factor for inflation, which if you listen to the government, they'll tell you, oh, the last 85 years have been averaging 3%. I ain't buying that for a second. So now if inflation goes up quicker than we're accustomed to, which was another issue that we dealt with in COVID, inflation was rising about 3 times its normal rate. So what happens if I have poor accounts receivable? Unless I am a strictly cash business, I'm always going to have to deal with people calling me up and saying, Mike, I need a little bit more time. Is my admin making sure that invoices are going out promptly? Sometimes business goes out, business is done, and if this falls through the crack, you know, somebody that is accustomed to paying 30 days all of a sudden hasn't paid, I call them up and it's like, hey, what's going on? They're like, I never received the bill. I never received the invoice. I go back and I look and it's like, oh my God, the invoice never went out. Follow up on unpaid invoices. Sometimes I can require a deposit. You see this a lot of time in construction. You know, if I'm getting my kitchen done in my house or a new roof or whatever, before the people get started, sometimes they'll say, hey, I need a third down, I need half down, because otherwise I'm going to be financing the materials for them. So, you know, that stuff's not really going to happen. Establish payment deadlines and charge late fees. Because if people think that they can get away with something, they're going to try and do it. And then last but not least, we have overexpansion. It's like all of a sudden my growth is consistent. So I'm growing at about 15% a year, and I'm seeing that my employees are happy, everything's going well, and then all of a sudden, I wind up getting a contract that allows me to grow 100% in the next year. So now this contract is only good for a year. So am I hiring people just for that year? How long is it going to take to get them up and running, depending upon what type of project it is? Am I going to need more equipment? Am I going to need more? Obviously, I'm going to need more payroll. Am I going to need to borrow more capital so that I can have the capital and reserves to facilitate this contract? And then what happens a year from now if my contract isn't renewed? So will these employees come on board for only a year? Am I telling the employees, hey, this contract is only for a year, so your job is only good for a year? So now we're getting into a little bit of the morality issues, because what am I telling the people that I need in order to facilitate this project? So cash flow management solutions, creating a rolling 90-day cash flow forecast. First and foremost, have an idea what's going on at all times. So we're going to monitor the money coming in, the money going out, when money is expected, when bills are due, what cash will be available. So this sounds like common sense, but it doesn't always work out that way. So the question that I would often ask people, if no new money came in the business for the next 30 days, could the business survive? That is a fascinating question, because if we are 30 days away from bankruptcy, then we need to restructure what it is that we're doing. So the solution would be create more cash flow reserves. Now, no business ever wants to see idle money just sitting there doing nothing. However, sometimes idle money can be the difference between picking up an additional contract, can be the difference between a opportunity lost, could be the difference between making payroll, rent, debt payments, taxes, and emergency. So that is cash flow management. So Peter, I know that you have had businesses in the past. Have you ever had to deal with cash flow management issues?
Oh my. I mean, I thought the word was cash flow is king. So I know you say cash flow is reality, but I've always realized that cash flow is king. Whoops, Peter's here.
Whoops, can you hear me? My other microphone wasn't working. Sorry about that.
Peter must have stepped away.
Whoops. Are you there, Michael? I'm sorry. Yep, I'm here.
With that being the case...
Oh, no, Peter's here. Peter's here.
I want to go to employee retention. As I mentioned earlier, employee retention is an enormous problem. People think, oh, somebody leaves, I'll just replace them. First of all, replacing employees can be a very expensive endeavor. So and these numbers are best guesstimates, but the average cost to replace an hourly worker is about 20 to 25% of however much you're actually paying them. The average cost of management is somewhere about 100% of what it is that you're paying them. And the average cost to replace a C-suite, your CEO, CFO, COO, runs about 250%. So if I have a $200,000 CTO, it's probably going to cost me about $500,000 to replace them.
Hey, Michael.
So part of this cost that's being factored in is getting somebody up and running. The training, am I having to pay a sign-on bonus depending upon who it is that I'm hiring? All of these little things I can't afford to let me knock out of the box. So the challenge in employee retention is many business owners will say, I can't find good employees. But the bigger question may, once I find a good employee, why can't I keep them? One of the things that I have seen throughout my days in business, which for those of you that heard my story, my entrepreneurial spirit started when I was 10 years old and I collected cans to pay for my trip to Washington, D.C. Then I got into baseball cards, and I got into screen printing, embroidery, and that specialty. And for the last 25 years, I've been serving my way to success in creating financial strategies. And what I've noticed is that people don't always leave strictly for money. People leave many a times because they feel underappreciated, right? This leads into what I like to call the human side of money. The human side of money are all the stresses that people face when dealing with personal finances. So we think, okay, well, Mike, you're talking about somebody's job. You're not talking about personal finances. However, these stresses can come from, something that you weren't counting on, like going through a divorce, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job. How do I fund the college experience for my kids? I just got that notice from my parents that they're going to need my help for long-term care. They're now going to come and live with me. So I do not believe it unrealistic to think that if I'm dealing with this stuff at home, I might be winding up taking it with me to my job. Now, if I work for a larger company, let's say a company with 150 plus employees, there's a good job that the owner of the company, maybe even my boss, they don't even know my name. All they're seeing is that my productivity is going down. And they're getting on my case like, hey, what's going on here? For the last 5 years, you've been at this pace. Now, all of a sudden, your numbers are off. We need to fix this problem. Otherwise, it's going to be a bigger problem. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm going through a divorce, and you're going to talk to me about this? If they don't know your name, they damn sure don't know that you're going through a divorce. So now you have all this stuff boiling in the background, and you're all frustrated, and you're thinking to yourself, you know what? I got to get the hell out of here. I can't deal with this. I deserve better from a workplace situation. So now I'm going to leave my job. And I might do a lateral move, because even if the money is the same, or maybe the benefits are not as good, but at the end of the day, I feel like I'm going to be in a better position, and my stress is not going to be getting any worse. So when an employee leaves, the business may lose productivity, knowledge, customer relationships. We cannot underestimate the value of those customer relationships, because if somebody goes somewhere else and takes those customers with them, that's revenue lost. That's having to train this person again. So we have a training investment. And what about team morale? If the team is looking at it like, if this guy or girl or lady can get fired, at any time, that means that my job is at risk. You often hear me talking about the last 15 years, the two industries, or really the three places that you wanted to be for job security were tech, finance, and the government. The three biggest sectors right now that are at job risk are tech, finance, and the government. And then businesses have to pay for recruiting, interviews, background checks, training, overtime for remaining employees, because somebody's got to pick up the slack for the person that just left. So what can we do to try and make the employees happy? What can we do for employees to want more than a paycheck? You know, it sounds ridiculous to even have to say it, but having respect for the employees, offering flexibility, growth opportunities, recognition goes so far. If I know that my company at least appreciates me, like I said before, people might leave to, jump to another company just because they want to feel appreciated. Letting them know that they have a purpose, fair treatment, letting them know that they have a voice. There's no worse feeling. Like I remember one time in one of the two jobs that I had my entire life, outside of that being self-employed, was I was a liaison between the sales force and the management. And I saw what was going on. It was very clear to me what needed to be done to increase productivity. But the company was so hell-bent on, no, these people will do things the way that we tell them to, otherwise they can go find somewhere else to go. So now I'm in a position that I can't even do my job, much less help the sales force. So having a voice is critical. And sometimes, as I just mentioned, the management may be the problem. So having poor management, having toxic cultures, having lack of communication, having micromanagement, and having lack of appreciation Peter, can you hear me?
Peter's here. Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me? I think you got to turn up your speakers. Michael, I think you have to turn up your speakers.
Thanks for listening in to the Michael Jacobs Radio Show on the Building Fortunes Radio Network. For strategic financial planning, for commercial lending help, he sees the path ahead so you can move with confidence. Call Michael Jacobs for strategic financial planning. Call Michael Jacobs to avoid financial blind spots. Call Michael Jacobs for the next right step. The Michael Jacobs Radio Show. Michael Jacobs focuses as a personal financial strategist and commercial lending specialist. Ready when you need a guide for strategic financial planning, for commercial lending help. He sees the path ahead so you can move with confidence. Call Michael Jacobs for strategic financial planning. Call Michael Jacobs to avoid financial blind spots. Call Michael Jacobs michaeljacobsradioshow.com. Make sure you listen to other shows on michaeljacobsradioshow.com. Call Michael Jacobs for strategic financial planning. Call Michael Jacobs to avoid financial blind spots.
Yeah, I can hear the thing.
Call Michael Jacobs for the next
right
step. The Michael Jacobs Radio Show.
Okay.
Thanks for listening in to the Michael Jacobs Radio Show. Michael Jacobs. Call Michael Jacobs. Call Michael Jacobs.
And we are back. Peter Mingils here with Michael Jacobs on the Michael Jacobs Radio Show. When I was asked a question a little bit earlier by Michael, he couldn't hear me. And I think that was mostly because I think his volume was low on his speakers. So we were hearing the whole thing. And we're going to wait for him to dial back in. So, Michael, you back in yet?
Yeah, I'm back in.
Perfect. Okay, good. So I don't know where to comment on, but I do want to make a couple of comments as we get started. First of all, I love this information. You're good at what you do, obviously, and great at pointing out real-life situations. A lot of people have never run a business before, so they don't really understand the magnitude of the things that you're saying. But I will share with you, a long time ago, I learned that cash flow is king. You used cash flow is reality, which I might start to use as well as far as the slogan is concerned, but cash flow is king. And as a direct salesperson, we don't have as many long-term and big financial, commissions and stuff like that, or financial things we have to worry about. Many times it's like if you're buying a vacuum, you're buying it now. You're either putting it on a credit card, or you're giving a guy a check or cash, or you're financing it, stuff like that. So usually we ask people to make decisions now. So if you have small decisions to make, I always recommend that you do whatever you possibly can to GTM, get the money now. The other thing that you referenced that I just wanted to highlight is just because you sent an email doesn't mean they got it. And if you think you did it and it really is important to you, you better follow up with a phone call. Because I can't tell you how many times something that was not spam wound up in somebody's junk folder. So if I sent an invoice and I waited to get paid, I would not be surprised if I didn't follow up. So just focus the line of questioning. If I was expecting to get paid, but I didn't follow up to see if they got the invoice, I can almost assume 100% of the time they never got the invoice. So if you send it, you might as well handle those awkward moments in advance. A hammy, I call it. Always handle awkward moments in advance. So if you say, I'm going to send you an invoice, and then I'm going to confirm that you got it. Or, can you confirm that you got it? At least this way, you know they got it. Because the worst thing in the world you get stuck into is the systems that companies have in place towards paying you. Like, for instance, some companies say, oh, we pay on Friday. Well, if they were supposed to pay 3 Fridays ago and you didn't get paid, and then you call them up, they say, I never saw it. Okay, good. I'll put it in our payroll. Well, if it's like on a Thursday and it's too late for this Friday, you're going to wait another week and a half. So all these things are crucial for those people that are running businesses.
One thing, and this is something that I do offer, is product financing. So if I'm selling something that, let's say, is a couple of $1,000, $5,000, then that seller financing, basically, I go to a company, they will give me $4,500 up front, and now they're going to take over the payments, the monthly payments. Maybe it's for 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, and I got my money up front, and then I'm kind of shifting that responsibility to somebody else. So now, if I'm offering seller financing, then I'm probably going to want to bake in an additional cost. So in other words, if you pay cash, maybe it's $4,800 or $4,750. cash or credit card, $4,750. But if you're doing the seller financing, then you're doing $5,000 because you have to pay for that additional fee that it is costing to offer the seller financing. But at least this way, even if I'm taking a little bit of a discount here, if I'm getting that money up front, because usually the finance companies will pay me in 2 days or 3 days or whatever it is. So now I have the ability to move forward. So there's a number of different ways to be able to do different things. So maybe if I'm in a pinch and I'm looking at, I'm looking at invoices. Another service that I provide is invoice factoring, PO factoring. So let's use the scenario. I get that huge contract. I'm accustomed to doing 10,000 widgets a month, and this contract is for 250,000 widgets in a month. My first concern is going to be, can my manufacturer handle this if I'm not manufacturing in-house? And is he going to give me the same terms to be able, is he going to be able to give me the same terms to be able to pay? So depending upon my margin, if I factor this invoice, I'm going to get paid against the invoice rather than having to wait for my customer to pay me. So I might give up 7 or 8 or 9 or 10%, but at least I'm getting that cash flow up front so that I can facilitate the contract. Otherwise, I might lose the contract and the profit that goes along with it. Does that make sense?
It does. Absolutely.
All right. So back to the disgruntled employee. We left off where the manager might be the problem. I noticed in the 2 jobs that I had that if the manager, let's say it was a newer foreign manager, and the manager had been an employee and the employee had been mistreated, that it's almost cyclical. So how the employee was managed many a times can wind up being how the manager manages the employees. So poor managers, toxic cultures, lack of communication, micromanagement, lack of appreciation. I would like to think that if I'm hired for a job, my boss is going to let me do my job. It's one thing if I'm doing it incorrectly and you step down, you're saying something. It's another thing when you are basically sitting with me in my chair and it's like, am I a trained monkey or like what's going on here? Burnout. We start out in something because we love it. Something changes. Like I always say, products come and go, tax laws change, but the one thing that remains consistent in what I do is the huge lack of financial education. So am I getting burned out? Am I unsatisfied? Do I feel like I'm underappreciated and constantly stressed? So no clear career path. I get hired to do a job, but I tell people all the time, when you invest, you should have an exit strategy in place. How do I get in? Why do I get in? How do I get out? Is the timing right to be able to get out? When I'm taking on a job, especially, let's say I'm a kid out of college, I'm just happy to have a job. But is there career advancement that is available? I don't want to be, not to pick on a teller in a bank, but if I'm going to go work for a bank, I don't want to be a teller for the rest of my life. I want to, if I want to get into, I went to college for finance. If this is my foot in the door for me, maybe it's a year or 2 years, however long down the line, but at least there's some type of advancement. First of all, that's going to keep me there, is the opportunity for advancement, versus the person who takes the teller job because they got to get something on their resume. So they know they're not going to stay there because it's not in their best interest. So who's responsible for the disgruntled employee? Sometimes it's poor hiring, right? Oh, the most available person, the least expensive person, someone who interviews well. If I am looking for the least expensive person, why is somebody willing to take the job for this amount? Now, I'm not saying that I always got to take the most expensive person, because they're not always worth the most amount of money. But I think it was, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? Actually, I think it was a month ago. We were talking about financial ageism, right? The poor bastard 50-year-old. It's like corporate America is trying to push me out because they're going to tell the company, not specifically, but they're going to tell the company, hey, this guy's 55 years old, hire somebody half his age and pay him a third the money. So now the 55-year-old who's not ready to retire, whether it's because he's not financially ready or he's just, he wants to continue to work, is now willing to work for less because the alternative is not working at all. So instead of hiring based on skill, character, cultural fit, reliability, long-term potential, you're putting yourself in a position where, great, I saved a little bit of money up front, but if I hired the wrong manager and it's affecting my productivity because the employees hate the guy or woman, and now I got to fire them and replace them, I didn't save any money. Now I'm costing myself so much more. No onboarding process. Hey, show up for work tomorrow. Okay, what am I supposed to be doing? Right? This is going to have confusion, frustration, mistakes, poor performance. As with any relationship, communication is critical. What is expected? Every now and then, good, bad, or ugly, how am I doing? Right? What's changing? Why is it changing? And where is the company going? Are we consolidating because the company is going to merge? In which case, how safe is my job? Silence creates uncertainty. The saying is no news is good news. Not always. Lack of recognition. I created a company called the Thank You Plan. And the Thank You Plan was designed around two key issues that I saw each and every day. One, huge lack of financial education in this country. Two, most companies are terrible when it comes to showing their customers, clients, and their employees awareness and appreciation. And I find that the biggest stress in most people's lives is their personal finance. Nobody's teaching it. Schools don't teach it. Parents can't teach it if they don't know. So now imagine being able to offer your employee a certificate entitling them to a 90-minute, no-cost, no-obligation financial planning session. That certificate's going to be branded with your logo. So now, as an additional benefit that the company is offering, which is addressing the biggest issue that most people deal with, now you're actually showing that you care. It sounds so simple, but that recognition with the understanding that people Everybody goes through financial stuff. I don't care how much you make, right? The expectations, the taxes, managing the cash flow. Am I overspending because I come into all this money? There is a reason why 65% of people that win the lottery are bankrupt within 2 years. So now imagine the day-to-day life. Do I have compensation problems? You know, we hear all the time about why manufacturing left the United States. It's because we cannot compete with the lower incomes that are being paid in other countries. And I'm not going to name any of the countries or what they're paying, but it's literally cheaper for US-based companies to have labor elsewhere. This is a problem that has been going on for decades. So if I'm offering below market pay, you know, sometimes larger companies think that because they're a larger company and people want to work for them, that they don't have to be as competitive in the pay, which is backwards. No bonus structure. Am I killing myself for no reason? No benefits, no incentive, no raises based on performance. You know, that raise based on performance can be looked at in many ways as profit sharing. Think about the term itself, profit sharing. So now I have a vested interest in performing to the best of my ability because the company is going to reward me for that. So employee retention solutions, right? Skills can often be taught, but it is much more difficult to teach integrity, work ethic, reliability, accountability, and attitude. Creating a real onboarding process. When I walk into that job, I know exactly what it is to expect. And now I have a way to see how structurally sound this company is. Communicate consistently, right? Weekly meetings, one-on-one conversations, performance review, goal setting, company updates. Now, I don't want to be taking up all of my employees' time with all of these different things, but at least if the employee knows on a consistent basis what to expect, then it can be, you know, now it becomes beneficial. Create a culture of recognition. So if the sales manager, let's say, takes the sales force out for pizza every now and then, if I'm offering some type of bonus to the top producers, even if I'm just saying thank you, being able to offer a little bit more responsibility and actually paying them for that, but recognizing their capability, flexible scheduling, professional development. So if this job is going to train me so that one day I decide that I'm going to leave, now I have those additional resources that I can put on my resume. So creating incentives, little things like this go a long way. And now, last but not least, the last challenge, taxes. Taxes are one of the few expenses that business owners know are coming, but may still get surprised by them. Part of the problem is many people think that we're in a high tax environment. The reality is we're in the third lowest tax environment that we've been in the last 100 years. But we get taxed on everything. We get taxed when we earn, save, spend, invest, and we get hit the hardest when we're dead. Now, being in business for ourselves or owning, self-employed, independent contractor. The government allows us tax deductions, tax credits. And it's interesting because the employee is like, oh my God, some of these companies make so much money. Now, not all companies make so much money, right? The guy who owns a laundromat is not NVIDIA with a $7 trillion market valuation. They are facing the same, the same types of issues, except they just don't have a boss to answer to. They are their boss. If I own a restaurant and I'm not franchising it, I'm self-employed. So there's many different things, and everything revolves around taxes because honestly, taxes are the biggest threat to our wealth. Federal taxes, state taxes, payroll taxes, sales tax, self-employment tax, estimated taxes. Again, this boils back to cash flow management, my estimated taxes. How much am I having to send in to the state on a quarterly basis? If I wind up shutting down my business, did I submit my last quarterly taxes? I shut my business down the middle of December, and I made Q4's quarterly taxes. The problem was my business wasn't fully dissolved until Q1 of the following year. So even though I wouldn't have had to have paid any taxes, I still have to file. And if I don't, now I'm getting hit with penalties and taxes. Like, it is a never-ending nightmare when we look at tax challenge. Right? So now, confusing revenue with taxable income. A business may generate $1 million in revenue, but revenue is not necessarily profit. The important questions to be able to ask: what were the expenses? What is taxable? What deductions are legitimate? Everybody is going to try and take as much advantage as possible, and I do not begrudge anybody. I mean, it's part of the reason why we're in business. However, if we do not understand what is legitimate and not, and God forbid we get audited, now all of a sudden we're looking at a whole nother issue, right? Poor record keeping. Again, if I get audited and the auditor comes in and is like, hey, show me your books, missed deductions, incorrect tax filing, auditing problems, higher tax bills because we thought we were being slipped. And again, there are many ways that the government allows us as a business owner to be more tax efficient. But human nature, many a times, puts us in a situation where we tend to get greedy. Oh, I was able to get away with this for so many years. I'm going to keep going. So part of the problem is having no tax strategy. Like I mentioned before, if I'm going to get into business, I want to know why I'm getting into business. What is my exit strategy? Am I going to leverage this business so that I can finance a new business? Am I leaving this for my kids? Am I going to sell it? But along the way, depending upon my exit strategy, that may affect how I'm doing business. So many business owners simply make money, spend money, file taxes, and pay whatever they owe. But there may be opportunities to plan ahead. I'm not picking on anybody in particular, but if you were to look at the two richest people on the planet, how are you worth hundreds of billions, if not literally $1 trillion, and you're paying like $100,000 in taxes? It's because debt is non-taxable. So I take my income, I go into debt to buy more income-producing assets. I leverage those assets. I continue to leverage those assets. And, what is revenue and what is profit? So these are some of the games that we can play. So a business owner may see money in the bank and think, "Oh, I got $100,000 available." But some of that money may actually belong to the IRS, to the state, payroll tax obligations. If I have to pay matching taxes on FICA, we're looking at about 7.5%. So the employee pays 7.5%, and I got to pay 7.5%. So again, taxes are the biggest threat to our wealth. Poor entity structure. This is a CPA conversation to have, but the structure of a business can easily affect how income is taxed, how owners are compensated, payroll taxes, and administrative requirements. The more administrative requirements that I have, the higher cost of doing business. How much am I dealing? How much do I need for my payroll taxes? I just hired a few new people. I got a new contract coming on. I just laid somebody else off. Right? What do I have to do now? And we are human, so we tend to procrastinate. We'll wait until year end. Once the year is over, many tax planning opportunities are limited. So the better question to ask is, what can I do before year end to legally reduce and manage my tax liability? Most people, if they're really trying to do it on the cheap, and I'm a small business, and I get that, revenue is important, but if I go, and I'm not picking on H&R Block, but if I go to H&R Block, they are not a tax strategist. My CPA may not be a tax strategist. Many a times the CPAs, while definitely a step above potentially the straight up tax preparer, because hopefully they have a better understanding, but their job is not to create tax strategies. Their job is they're going to take what you give them and spit something out so that you can provide the government and get them off your back. But am I taking advantage of what's out there? I mean, there are, if I want to be philanthropic, there are programs out there that will allow me to get a 5 times multiplier of my contribution. Mike, what are you even talking about? If I contribute $100,000, I'm going to get a $500,000 tax deduction. This is not something that the CPA would know or necessarily know. They may or may not be familiar with it. However, my tax planner more than likely will be familiar with it. The financial planner may or may not be familiar with it. So tax information, if I'm strictly relying on the internet or AI, I'm probably going to get myself into some trouble. So some of the solutions in regards to taxes is having a reserve account. Making sure that out of every dollar in revenue that I'm doing, I'm setting aside a portion of that, because that money does not belong to me. So I'm going to set aside a portion of that to make sure my taxes are getting paid. As I just mentioned, meet with a tax professional before year end. This may affect how I'm funding my retirement accounts. This may affect when I'm looking to grow or expand my business or take on a business partner. And this may actually determine when I go into business. Because if I open up my business in December, let's say, now I got to do a tax return for the previous year. Versus if I wait till January, now my overall tax return will be next year. And yes, I'm going to have to make sure that I'm making my quarterly payments. But we can go over things like expected income, expected deductions, estimated tax liability, retirement plan options, equipment purchases, business structure consideration. There are specific reasons that I'm not going to get into where is it time to convert out of an LLC into an S Corp? Is there time to convert out of an S Corp to a C Corp? Where is my business set up? Am I in a state tax-free environment? What type of, do I have to disclose who the business owners are? Different places have different things, right? Maintain accurate books so that we don't get caught off guard. Understand the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. Tax avoidance is utilizing legitimate strategies in order to be more tax efficient. Tax evasion is what got Al Capone landed in jail because they couldn't get him on anything else, but they got him for tax evasion. So if Al Capone could wind up going down, you don't want to be the next Al Capone. So key principle here is that the goal is not to avoid paying taxes illegally. The goal is to avoid paying more taxes than legally required. So in wrapping this up, the three problems are deeply connected. We've talked about this the entire time. A business has poor cash flow. Because of poor cash flow, it can't offer competitive compensation. Employees leave. The business must spend money hiring and training replacements. Productivity declines, revenue falls, tax planning becomes more difficult, cash flow gets worse. This creates a cycle that people just can't get out of. So the opposite cycle is also possible. Better cash flow creates more stability, better compensation, better employee retention, more predictable profitability, right? Better tax planning, which creates more available cash and more opportunities for growth. So my last message, a successful business is not simply a business that generates revenue. It's a business that manages cash, retains talented people, and plans for taxes before the bill arrives. So ask yourself this question. Are you building a business that creates freedom, or have you simply created a job that owes you? And without further ado, I turn it back to the one and only Peter Mingils.
I am here. This was great. Fantastic information. I love hearing your perspective on things and the way you simply show people a lot of stuff. And Michael, I'm so frustrated because I say, if this is so important, and it seems to be, whether you're an employee or an employer or anybody else in the middle, why isn't this taught in school? Like, I'm so frustrated. Like, how in the world do they expect people to learn this on their own? Now, the conspiracy side of me says, Well, they want to keep you messed up so you'll screw up and you'll be enslaved with all the mistakes you make. And we don't need you smart, because if you're smart, you'll probably, revolt on this crazy sort of information. But why isn't this taught in school? Any idea?
There is a good reason for that, and I buy into your conspiracy theory. I have often said that a job represents the journey of the broke. And I am not diminishing employees because employees make up businesses. However, school teaches you how to become an employee. Now, for most employees, they will take a job where the business pays them just enough money so that they don't quit, and they will provide just enough effort not to get fired. And again, this is not all employees, it's not all employers, but structurally, corporate America is not designed for the success of the employee. The employee serves the purpose of generating the capital that it takes for the business to run. Now, theoretically, and I've heard this from many people, the government rewards those who take the risk. If I'm going to open up a business, I'm taking on a certain amount of risk. Now, theoretically, if I open up a business, I'm hiring employees. Now, that being the case, if I'm self-employed, I may not be taking on employees. In today's world, I build a business. If I'm somebody that builds a Shopify, I enter into that space. I don't have any employees. I'm selling products through this website, and I'm not even purchasing the product. I'm basically wholesaling it, getting it essentially on consignment. So somebody buys something online, that order goes directly to the product provider, and they'll ship it out and take care of it. So now I'm in marketing and advertising. So I don't necessarily hire people for that. And this is how businesses are being built now. God forbid I buy a tech company that my ultimate goal is a year from now I'm going to sell it to a bigger tech company, and I might make millions of dollars in the process, or tens of millions of dollars in the process. So the way that business is run is absolutely different. And again, I make the argument the schools don't teach it because it's almost like businesses rely on schools for their labor force. This is what I'm saying. It's like the minor leagues for the journey of the broke. So God forbid we teach people how to be in business for themselves. What is that doing? It's affecting the labor force. So if you don't teach it, then you don't run that risk of it coming back and biting you.
Great information.
So like I said, I agree with your inner conspiracy theorist, because at bare minimum, on some level, you are absolutely correct.
And, everybody does whatever is in... Right, I hear you. Everybody does whatever's in their best interest. And the government's best interest is having a stable, a stable community, if you will, that are not like revolting. They're looking for the maximum return on their investment, which means employees paying the maximum amount of taxes with the least amount of deductions so they can keep more of the money. And the best way to do that is make sure that they stay busy and preoccupied, and I don't want to use the word ignorant, but lack of knowledge of the way it works, and they've figured out how to do that. And the richest ones, the richest people, they figured out how to manipulate everything and probably paid their way. So I always say if it's big, it's rigged. So certainly this is something, but not knowing this information is crucial for your demise. So not knowing this information is almost a guarantee of your lack of success potential. You might still be successful. You might still figure it out, and you might not care. You might just say that's the way it is, and I'll play by those rules. I'll focus on something else. But I don't know. This is really interesting information. And for people who want to hear this again, you can go to...
One more thing, though. I find that as a business owner, I'm going to want to make sure that my personal finances are in order. Because if they're not, and something happens in the business, now I'm going to bankrupt myself personally.
Right.
And I see that happen on the personal financial strategy, whether it's individual, family, but then on the business, on the commercial lending side, and this ties back to the corporate financial strategy, sometimes I shake my head and I'm thinking, okay, this person got here either through nepotism or inheritance. Because how does a business owner not understand the finance behind their own business? Sometimes it boils down to the guy swinging the hammer and the nail is really good at swinging the hammer and the nail, and he hates who he's doing it for. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to become the GC. I'm going to become the general contractor. Meanwhile, he doesn't understand marketing and advertising and infrastructure and cash flow management and taxes and insurance and all of this stuff. He just wants to not be miserable in doing something that he's really good at. But now he just took on all of these responsibilities, and because he never owned his own business, he was unfamiliar with it. So at bare minimum, if let's say that he had some clients already lined up and blah, blah, blah. So maybe he takes on a JV partner who can guide him through the process, and ultimately either he can sweat equity his way in because the other person has a more established business, or at least he has some type of mentor. So maybe he hires a business management consultant and he offsets some of that responsibility onto them, but then he's got to look at it from cash flow management and say, do I have the money to be able to pay the guy or lady who's going to make sure that I don't fail out of business because I didn't know what the hell I was doing?
Good stuff. So
to answer your question, why is nobody teaching this? As we mentioned, I think last week, access to information 20 years ago was very different to access for information today.
Right.
20, 30 years ago, it was that people just didn't have access to information. They didn't know where to go. Now, you go to AI, you go online, and you're at the mercy of the intent of the content on the internet. So now I can get information, but is it correct? Is it in my best interest? Am I going to make decisions that will affect how much taxes that I'm paying because I went online and asked it, hey, I'm doing this. What corporate structure should I have? Meanwhile, I didn't have all the information to enter in to tell AI what I actually needed. This, to me, is like a never-ending... This lack of information is never-ending. And when we look at the three things that this show is based on, seemingly it all revolves around information. Whether we learn it by doing it, or we go to the wrong place to get it.
Well, this is sure great information for those people that want to learn more about you, what you do. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Always going to be the handy-dandy phone. Cell phone number 443-506-3841. And again, as always, I always appreciate my listeners. So you are all entitled to a 90-minute, no cost, no obligation financial strategy session, not only initial, but the follow-up as well.
Excellent. So for those people listening in, check him out, michaeljacobsradioshow.com. You can also find his other links on michaeljacobs.com and his commerciallendingaccess.com as well. We'll make sure all this stuff is in the show notes, as well as links to all the other important things that Michael has spoken about. Michael, thanks for being here. This is always mind-bending for me because it really makes me think, and I think of some of the dynamics of why either people, when we just talk about how important this is, why people either pick it up or don't learn it or whatever, and the dynamics of family. And even if I had all this information, would my kids actually listen? Like, you get that whole different dynamics of what it's like evolutionary for the kids to kind of reject their parents, so they leave the house. I don't know. It's all kind of messed up, but we're responsible for this, so I really appreciate you sharing this information. And we're going to catch everybody next time on the Michael Jacobs Radio Show on the Building Fortunes Radio Network. Thanks, everyone.
Wow. You've been listening to the Michael Jacobs Radio Show on Building Fortunes Radio and the Humongous Radio Network. If you want to listen to this again or tune in to the other radio shows, you'll be able to hear the Michael Jacobs Radio Show on the Humongous AM and Humongous FM Radio Network and on all major platforms such as Amazon's Audible and Apple Podcasts, Spotify and iHeartRadio, and on many of your favorite podcasts. Michael, Peter, and I are glad you listened in. Call Michael Jacobs or contact him through the michaeljacobsradioshow.com website and see if Michael can help you with your personal financial strategies and make sure you avoid any financial blind spots. Share this show with the people that are important to you. Thanks again for listening in. And now, go make the world a better place.